Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Agents to Owners podcast. Joining me today is retired Lieutenant Colonel Oak McCulloch. During Lieutenant McCullough's military career, he served in 3 operational deployments, including Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm in Iraq, support operations in Bosnia, and a peacekeeping deployment in Kosovo. Since retiring from a 23-year career in the U.S. Army in 2009, the Lieutenant Colonel held numerous leadership positions, including the Senior Military Science Instructor and Recruiter at Stetson University, the Recruiting Operations Officer at the Army ROTC and at Embry-Riddle University, and many, many more community involvements. Without further ado, the reason why we're here today is the Lieutenant Colonel's published, was it your first book?
Yeah, it was my first book.
First book in 2021, Your Leadership Legacy, Becoming the Leader You Were Meant to Be. So without further ado, thank you for being here, Lieutenant Colonel Oak McCulloch. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, well, thanks, Brad. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. I really enjoyed our conversation that we had about a month ago, and I'm just really excited to get into your, what's I think become your passion of educating people on leadership, and you've had a long career in leadership roles. So I'm really looking forward to converting that to our business owners, which is what most of our audience is here. So. But tell us before we get started, tell us a brief overview of your career and what has led to you taking this path and writing a book and educating people on leadership.
Yeah, so I've got about 40 years of leadership experience. Started in high school. I played baseball, basketball, football in high school. I was always captain of the team, and did a little bit of student government, club leadership positions, all kinds of things. Went to college, graduated from ROTC at Northern Illinois University, where I met my wife, who was also in the Army. She was an Army nurse for 8 years. And then did my first 5 years in the Army as an infantry lieutenant, infantry officer. And then I switched over to Armor Cav, and I did my last 18 years in the Armor Cav branch. A lot of teaching. Which kind of led me to where I am. Did a lot of teaching of junior leaders, and not only in the United States, but I was also stationed in Australia to teach their majors as well. And then I ended up my last assignment on active duty was a professor of military science at the University of South Alabama. So I had a hand in producing the next generation of leaders for the Army in this great nation. And when I was there, I was going around talking to high school. I did all my own recruiting, basically. Going around talking to high school students and college students as well. And I'd always ask them what they wanted to do, what they wanted to be, what profession, and what they wanted to do. And almost always somebody would come up with, and I want to be a leader. And I'd say, oh, that's great. The world needs more leaders. I said, what does that mean? What does it take to be a leader? And you get that deer in the headlights look. They had no idea what it meant to be a leader. They just knew they wanted to be one, and probably for the wrong reasons. Probably because they wanted the title, they wanted more pay, all those kinds of things. And that's okay. Leaders get those things, generally. But if that's the only reason you want to be a leader, go do something else. You're never going to be a good one. So I came up with a presentation that I've been given, and of course I've added to it and modified it, but I've been giving it for about 20 years now, probably, on what it takes to be a good servant leader. And that's how I came up with my book, is I took that presentation. Sometimes presentations are only about 45 minutes long. Longest one I've been given is an hour and a half. 2 weeks I'll be in Georgia talking, and they actually gave me 2 hours to talk. But, in 45 minutes, obviously you can't talk about everything. And I've got about 20 different things I can talk about. So I just took all those things and I put them in the book. And my book I don't talk about theory at all. I don't even think I mentioned the word theory in my book. It's all about everyday things that every leader can do to help improve their leadership skills and abilities and empower the people that they have the privilege to lead. And it is a privilege to be better people.
Yeah. So why don't we start there? Talk about talk about what servant leadership is and what it means to be part of a servant leadership culture.
Yeah. So to me, servant leadership is all about taking care of the people that you have the privilege to lead. And that doesn't mean that you let them do anything they want. Because I say that sometimes and people say, well, I don't want to be a servant leader. I don't want people walking all over me. I said, then you have no idea what servant leadership is about. Servant leadership is taking care of people. Sometimes that means you're going to make them do things they don't want to do because it's in their best interest. They may not know at that moment that it's in their best interest, but it is, and you're going to make them do it. So you take care of them, you train them to a standard, and then you empower them to be able to do things on their own, not just because you told them to do it. And you provide them with all the things they need to better themselves. And when I tell people that it's not about you, because servant leadership is not about you, it's about the people that you're leading and the organization that you have the privilege to lead. And I say it's not about you, but I always get, and especially young men and women will tell me, well, Colonel McCulloch, I want to get my next promotion and I want to get my next pay raise. And I said, well, if you do this servant leadership thing right, you'll get those things because you'll take care of people. They'll be better, which makes your organization better, which means you're going to get your pay raise and your promotion. But you get it for the right reasons, not because you're greedy, but because you help somebody else become not only a better worker, but hopefully a better person.
Yeah. How does that benefit the team, that you're working with?
So I think when you make the people in your organization better, that benefits everybody in the organization. And one of the things I believe in servant leadership and that I think leaders should do is to make sure people understand that you need to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, not because it's somebody's watching or somebody's going to check on you. They are watching and they are going to check on you. There's no doubt about that. But you do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And if you have that culture, and I think servant leadership lends itself to that culture, then everybody in your organization is going to be doing the right thing, making a positive difference in other people's lives on a daily basis. And that's going to help the organization become better as a whole, not just individuals and not just you.
In the military, there's different styles of leadership.
Sure there are.
And do you have the the ability to, if Lieutenant Colonel McCulloch is going to be a servant leader, does Private Bolt over here be able to, does he have the leeway to be an authoritarian leader if he, moves up the ranks?
Sure. Look, I've worked for both types in the military. I've worked for the authoritarian leaders and I've worked for servant leaders. And that's part of the reason that I think I've gravitated toward the servant leadership part is because the best leaders that I had in the Army were servant leaders. I had a boss one time who retired, a 4-star general, who was a mentor of mine. And he used to tell me, oh, leadership is on a scale. And on this end of the scale, you have that authoritarian, micromanaging, do things exactly the way I tell you to do it. And we've all worked for that person, and nobody likes to work for that person.
Yeah.
And then on the other end of the scale, you have Attila the Hun in chaos, controlled chaos, but chaos.
Yeah.
And he said, and you want to be as close to chaos as you can be, as you feel comfortable. Further down that road toward Attila the Hun, that's where you want to be. And he said 2 reasons. One, because that allows you to use other people's abilities, skills, knowledge. And that's where creativity happens.
Yeah.
He said, and the second part is that's where people start to trust you. When you start allowing them to make decisions and do things on their own without you telling them exactly what to do, that's where that trust starts to build. And no organization can run effectively and efficiently without that trust.
Yeah. From my perspective, from the outside looking in, especially specifically in the military, that it, at least in the very beginning, it probably has to be more authoritarian.
Sure. I
Correct.
was a basic training company
Yeah.
commander. And when we got that new group of 250 privates in on the first day, believe me, the drill sergeants weren't anything about servant leadership. It was
Correct.
about, you're going to do exactly what I tell you, how I tell you. And you got to have that.
Yeah.
By the time they graduated, we had started to gravitate toward, okay, now you know some things. Now you can start making some decisions. Very minimal at that point because they're privates, they're brand new to the Army. But we started to switch that over. And even with me as being the company commander, I had to support my drill sergeants, being very authoritarian in the beginning. But then I would always try to push them toward showing some servant leadership toward the end of basic training, AIT cycle, with all those new privates. So they got a taste of somebody under them understanding that they get to make decisions. The whole time I made sure that everybody in my organization, me, the drill sergeants, tank commanders, and everybody teaching them took care of them. So that part of servant leadership was absolutely still there, even though they were being very authoritarian in their direction of what they had to do.
When did you, as you evolved, I mean, you had, I would probably place you in the category of you had a lot of these leadership skills. You were just kind of, born with some of them. That's how you felt. Where did, along the road in your career, where did you start to develop and to feel like, and I know you said you had a mentor, that this is the way I want to lead, is that I need to lead by example and
Right.
not a, do as I say, mentality.
Yeah.
How did that evolve for you?
Yeah, for me, it started kind of early because I was the captain of my sports teams, and I had a basketball coach that I still stay in contact with, Coach Terry Niedzwicki, who was an absolute servant leader. He was there. He held us to standards. He did things that made us do things the way that they needed to be done. But he really took care of us, and he understood that it wasn't just his job to come be a coach of a good basketball team. It was his job to help develop young men that were going to be good citizens, good fathers, good husbands. And he did that. And so I started to see that. And then as the captain, he and other coaches, but certainly he would, make sure that I understood that it wasn't about me. When I made decisions, it was about the team. It was about the other players. I had to take them into account. And then I had, I don't know, my first assignment in the Army. I was lucky. I had some good leaders, and I had some good people who worked for me, who I learned a lot from as well, that were really, truly servant leaders that kind of set me on that path that I knew that's the type of leader that I wanted to be.
What kind of qualities and skill set do you feel that you had that you've been able to ascend to this, this high rank that you've had? What do you think set you apart from, some of your others in your group where you were able to be promoted to this, high level?
Yeah, so I give a few people credit for making me who I am today, and so I think a couple different things. My father used to tell me when I was a young boy, he had this thing called the 75% rule, and he used to tell me, son, if you can't do something better than 75% of the people doing it, then you need to figure out you need to do one of two things. You either need to figure out how to get better at it, or you need to go find something else to do, because obviously it doesn't matter to you. So his message was, try to be the best you can be at whatever it is that you do. And I took that to heart, and I always tried to do that. I was always trying to make myself better, do not only be the best at what I did, but just be a better person during anything that I was doing. And I think that really helped me throughout my career, that I was always trying to improve myself. And I think a couple other self-discipline. I think early on, I learned the value of self-discipline, not discipline, self-discipline. And there's a huge difference. Discipline, I'm standing over you, telling you what to do, making sure you're doing it. Self-discipline, nobody's going to check on you. You just got, you got to do it. And you do it because you got to do it. And so I think those two things, the desire to be the best at whatever I did, and some self-discipline that I developed pretty early.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your book. What kind of led to you deciding I want to write a book, and it's going to be about this, and talk a little bit about that process? I think a lot of others that I've talked to who have, written their first book, it's a much more demanding project than they expected. But when you're passionate about it, you just keep at it. So let's talk a little bit about the process and what led you to write this book.
Yeah, well, I kind of knew I wanted to write the book. That was something that I knew I wanted to do. And for years I've thought, I'm going to write a book, and I just never got around to it. And then it's funny, my wife and I and her mother and a couple other people who live in the condo here with us, we went to an event at our Catholic church, and it was kind of a motivational / how do we revitalize the Catholic Church kind of presentation. It was 3 hours long, and there was a guy who came and talked, great speaker, and he didn't speak for all 3 hours. He spoke for like 45 minutes. We took 15-minute break. He talked for 45 minutes, took 15 minutes break, and then talked for another 45 minutes. And every time he took a break, I'd go up and I'd talk to him, because he had written a book, several books, and he was speaking out speaking to people, which is something I knew I wanted to do. And so I was kind of picking his brain. And at the end of it, the last break, when he finished, I was talking to him, and he was giving me some good advice. And we kind of said our goodbyes, and then he turned around, he stopped, and he turned around and he said, "Oak, have you written a book?" And I said, "Well, I'm thinking about it." And he looked at me and he said, "Stop thinking about it and do it." And so I went home that night. That was the 15th of February, 2020. I went home that night, wrote out the table of contents, and I started writing the book the next day, and I published it on the 12th of February, 2021. So, but just like you said, I mean, it just takes the discipline to keep at it. There were days when I didn't have much going on, and I thought, well, I'll make sure I write a little bit that day. And I'd sit down, and it was like, yeah, I got nothing.
Yeah.
And then the next day, it just came to me, and I started writing. And so, you just got to stick with it and stick at it. And that's the advice I give people is, if you think you want to write a book, start it. It may take you 2 years, 3 years. You might do it in 6 months, whatever it is, but just start it, because until you start it, you're never going to write it.
Yeah, I think it's something you learn as you go, right? I mean, how do you structure? You have all these thoughts that have done, and I think you were doing a little bit of speaking. You were doing some speaking before that, so you had some outlines.
But one of the things I did, which helped me, and maybe it'll help somebody out there who's thinking about writing a book, is once I came up with my table of contents, what I did was, because I'd be in bed at night, and I'd wake up and I'd have an idea. And I thought, well, I'll write that down tomorrow. And when I woke up in the morning, it was gone. So what I did was I took each chapter and I made a folder on my computer. And in each folder, I put a blank Word document, so that when I came up with an idea, and maybe I didn't have time to sit down and write, but when I came up with an idea, whether it was during the day or when I woke up at night thinking about something, I'd come into my computer and I'd type a couple lines, just so that it would remind me what I was thinking about. And then I could always go in and fill that out as I had time. And that really did help me, and that made a big difference.
Yeah. So I haven't picked up your book, and I will. When I pick it up, what can I expect from reading your book?
So I don't talk about theory at all. I don't even think I mentioned the word theory in my book. And theory is okay, but that's not what makes you a good leader. And I want you can know all the theory in the world and be a horrible leader. Met those people.
Right.
So I didn't want to write a book about theory. I wanted to write a book that people could use every day to help them. And I've had people say that they keep it on their desk at work and they thumb through it when they come into a situation. They'll pull something out of my book and use it. And so it's based on some principles that I think every leader needs to know, because leadership hasn't changed in 2,000 years, and it's not going to change in 2,000 years. What makes you a good leader is the same. You can call it whatever you want, but the principles are the same. You got to lead by example, have integrity, character, know how to communicate. Those kinds of things aren't ever going to change about being a leader. So I've got those principles, and then I use personal stories, either my own or somebody else's that I know, to kind of emphasize what those principles are and how you can use them to improve your leadership ability.
Okay. The reason why it's so interesting to me, and you touched on something earlier about, your personal development, and that's, how you started to ascend some of these positions. I feel like for myself in a leadership role, I owned my business for almost 7 years before I really started to develop myself. And that's when I think I started to get, better. And I think that I got a lot more team buy-in when I started to develop myself first, by reading books, listening to podcasts. I take my leadership role very seriously. And, I know I mentioned this before. It's interesting in this space, and I think it's similar for many small business owners, that we kind of back into this leadership role, at least when we grow. For the most part, we start out as good salespeople, and we build, we're sold this dream to, build this book of business, and this is going to be, we're going to have this unlimited income. Well, next thing we know, we need help, and then we need more help. And before you know it, because most of us in this role are driven, and we're motivated to succeed, and we're passionate about doing it. So we build this team of 3-4 people. Before we know it, we have a team, right? Well, we're so used to being the technician, we don't really know how to be a leader.
Right.
We kind of know, if you've been on sports teams, or you think and you think how to manage people, but we're managing people they don't have the same drive that we do. They don't have the same interests. We don't necessarily, realize that. So it's a bit like herding cats for a while.
Yeah.
We're trying to get everybody to move in the same. Why can't we get everybody to move in the same direction?
Right.
And until you start to, a little bit from my experience, of really kind of get into our team as people, because we don't just have an employee from 8 to 4. We have the employee that, it's their whole life, it's
Absolutely.
just, so we have to take an interest in who they are and what they are, and realize that they're people too. And that my family's the most important thing to me, and so is theirs.
That's right.
So until we get into again, become a servant leader, and that once we realize that, well, we're serving our people, and then they're serving our customers.
Right.
So give us some technique, strategy on how we can get our individuals to better buy into what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. So I think it all comes up to building a team, like you're saying. a team that cares about each other, cares about the organization and each other. And I think that the way to do that, number one is that you got to get to know the people on your team, and they got to get to know you, because it's, you know, Vince Lombardi, probably the greatest football coach that ever lived. He had this saying. He said, a team is not a group of people who play together. A team is a group of people who trust each other. And so you got to start with that trust. And when I talk about trust, I talk about 360-degree trust. It's not just the person you lead trusting you, although that's probably the most important part, because without that, nothing else works. But you got to trust the person that you're leading. And then the people in your organization have to trust each other. And then in a business, now you're talking about the people that you're doing business with have to trust you, and you have to trust them, because they're not going to do business with you if they don't trust you. One of the ways to start building that community, your team into a community, not just a group of people who are working in your office, is to get to know them and for them to get to know each other. So one of the things that I've learned throughout my time is get out and get out from behind your desk and go see them where they work. Nobody wants to follow somebody who sitting behind a desk all day. I got it. Leaders got to sit behind a desk on occasion because there's paperwork to do and all that. But get out as much as possible to where they are working. And I always tell people it should be your goal as a leader to go out and find one person in your organization every day and find out one new thing about that person. Not about business, about their personal life. What's their spouse's name? What's their kids' names? What sports do their kids play? What hobbies do they have? What do they like? What don't they like? The more you get to know that person, the more you can determine what jobs are better for them than somebody else. Because, you know, a job comes up, a task that you have to have done. There's somebody in your office that's going to be better at that than somebody else, I promise you. And the only way you're going to know that is if you get to know the people. A good way to do that, I had a boss who retired, a 3-star general who is a mentor of mine, who said to me one day, he said, Oak, never, ever, ever turn down a chance to go get your own cup of coffee. He said 2 things happen when you do that. Number one, you show everybody that no matter how high up you get, you show everybody that you're no better than they are. You got to go get your own cup of coffee just like they do. And number 2, if you're lucky, you got 2 or 3 different ways to get to the coffee pot and back to your office. And along the way, you stop and you talk to people so that you get to know them. Now, here's the downside to that. If you're trying to get to know them by asking them personal questions, then you got to be willing to answer personal questions so they can get to know you. And that's where a lot of leaders kind of draw the line.
Yeah.
And that's the tough one to overcome. But if you really want to build a community, people have to trust each other. They have to know each other. And for them to trust each other, they got to know each other. Nobody's going to trust somebody they don't know. And another good way to get them to get to know each other, I told somebody this, he had about 250 people in his organization and has a building, his own building that he has, his organization does. And he was talking about, you know, nobody in my organization knows each other. They know names because they send emails to Brad or to Tom or John. But if Brad walked up and stood in front of their desk, they wouldn't know who he was. And I said, well, here's a way to fix that. Every Friday, have a no text, no phone call, no email in the office day. If you want to talk to Brad, you get out of your seat, you go find Brad, and you talk to him face to face. And he said he tried that. And every Friday he did that. In about a month, he said, it's amazing. People are actually talking to each other. When they pass each other in the hallway, they say, hi now. Hi, Brad. How you doing?
Yeah.
And he said you could see it started to become a community, not just a bunch of people working in the office.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. That's something that just this last year we had, COVID was a mess for a lot of reasons. When we came back from COVID, I had all of my staff in separate offices, which was, convenient, and so it was a good, safe way for us to come back. But I couldn't stand it because we were all separated. and we never kind of really, it took us a long time to get out of that. For other reasons, I had less people in our office and I downsized. And so I was able to put most of our service staff in one room. And I thought there was going to be a big benefit to that. And there has been. There's so much more camaraderie now and communication, and it's great.
Yeah.
I mean, I sit in the next office over and I hear them over there having just really a good time, which is great for me, because especially this is been one of the most difficult years in the insurance history. But they were able to get through it a lot easier because they have each other.
That's right.
And they have each other's support. It's right there. So it's massive. How about, can you give some parallels to leading in the military and leading a small business?
Yeah. So I'm a huge believer that leadership is leadership.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter where you learn it. It doesn't matter where you practice, because leadership is about people.
Yeah.
Plain and simple. It's not about flow charts. It's not about organizational charts. It's not even really about bottom line. I got it. If you're running a business,
Yeah.
you got to make money. I got that. But in the end, if you take care of people, they're going to take care of your organization. They're going to be better. They're going to take care of your organization. You're going to make money in the end anyway, again, if you do it right. So I think leadership is about people. Now, having said that, when I retired from the Army, I was the associate director of a large food bank. There were things I did in the Army, ways that I led, that I had to adjust when I went into the civilian world, certainly with a bunch of volunteers as well. But the principles didn't change. Just how I used them might have changed a little bit. How I communicated with people, how I asked people to do things may have changed, but the principles don't change. Leadership is leadership.
Yeah, agreed. I would say, as I was thinking about this, question myself, I think something a lot of us talk about is having a process for a number of things. And that's something the military has in spades, right? There is a process for everything, right? And there's structure. For us, oftentimes we have to build it.
Yeah.
But I think it's part of keeping a clear communication, and this is the expectations, and this is how we do it. I think that is, to me, is that was a good parallel to the military. I mean, I can't imagine the amount of processes that there is, in the military.
Yeah, I think, and process is good, and I think that if nothing else, it's a fallback. If all else fails, then you've got this. Everybody knows this. But I also think that you can't get so wrapped up in rules and regulations and processes that you forget why you're there and taking care of people. And I know many times in my career, there'd be a rule, and I wanted to do something because we needed to, for this person, had to take care of them. And my HRA lady would say, "Sir, you can't do that. That's against the rules." And I said, "I don't care what the rule says. That we need to do this for that person, and we're going to do it. And if you need me to give you a memo that says we're going to do it, and I made you do it, I'm happy to do that. But we can't let rules not let us take care of the people." I got it. Rules are there for a reason.
Yeah.
And if you're going to break a rule, it needs to be for a very good reason. I got that. But processes help you on a day-to-day basis, and then you got to make decisions off of those process. One of the things that I think that I've given out to several people who own business in the Army, whenever you take over a command, we call it a command philosophy. You can call it a leadership philosophy, whatever you want to call it. But you actually write out some things, and it's posted so everybody sees it.
Yeah.
And it says, like mine, whenever I wrote it, I'd say, okay, this is our mission. This is what we have to accomplish. Here's what you can expect from me. Here's what I expect from you. And here are some rules that I expect everybody, including myself, to live by, some values. And now everybody kind of understands what we have to get done.
Yeah.
And what the rules that we're going to play by. on a daily basis are going to be. And I think that helps out, kind of clarifies for some people what it is what they can expect. Because, that fear of the unknown, especially when somebody new takes over, that fear of that unknown is pretty high up there.
Yeah.
So if you can kind of eliminate some of that by telling people what they can expect, not only from you, but how you're going to treat them and what you expect from them, then that kind of gets everybody motivated to kind of get on the same sheet of music.
Yeah. I mean, clear communication is everything, and
Huge.
setting what expectations are. Then people know.
That's right. And communication is, you can't lead if you can't communicate.
Right.
Plain and simple. That old adage, if it can be misunderstood, it will be, is absolutely true. When you communicate with people, you got to be clear, concise, easily understood. And I get in trouble sometimes because I always say you got to be brutally honest, because I believe that. That when you say something, they gotta understand it, and they gotta understand what it is they have to do.
Right. Yeah. People will be confused if they don't know what to do or what's expected.
That's right.
You touched a little bit on something I just want to get back to. I think a lot of business leaders, including myself, have struggled with. I'm all on board with, being a servant leader, but I do feel like there has to be a line to some extent, because at some point I might have to make a decision that
Sure.
affects their hours, their jobs, or
whether they have a job.
Yeah. So I'm always, and you hear, in the sports world of being a player's coach, and you alluded to some of this earlier. How do we maintain that? I mean, I think of thinking aloud, is a lot of it's clear communication, right? You can be on their side, you can look out for them, but how do we maintain that authority, I guess?
Yeah.
Is what I'm looking at. Yeah.
Well, because you still have to look out for the organization.
Yeah.
I mean, especially if you're the owner of the organization, you still get, again, you got to make money, and it has to be successful. So you certainly you're not only looking out for the people, but you're looking out for the organization as well. So I think, just because you're getting to know somebody you still got to keep that leader-led relationship. I mean, You're still the boss, you're still the leader. That doesn't mean you can't get to know people, but that relationship still has to be maintained. And I think that goes to professionalism.
Yeah.
If you are professional in the way you handle things, the way you talk to people, the way you interact with people, then you maintain that leader-led relationship. In the Army, servant leader, and when we talk about making decisions about people, I mean, we made decisions that were life and death for people.
Right.
And again, I think people are willing to accept that from somebody that they trust. So
Correct.
Again, I think that it goes back to, even in the civilian world, in whatever leadership position you're in, it goes back to trust. And if you can build that trust, then they understand that, you're trying to take care of them, and you're also trying to take care of the organization. So you have to make some tough decisions sometimes. And if they trust you, then they understand that that's your job, and they may not like your decision, but it's your job.
If they feel like you have their best interest
at
heart, and sometimes you just have to say no.
Yeah.
But if they trust you, it comes across, it's received a lot better.
Sure. I believe. Yeah. Again, servant leadership doesn't mean that you're going to let them do whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want. And I always use this example. When we get a part in for a vehicle, the rule in the Army is when the part comes in, it goes on the vehicle. And I don't care if it takes 12 hours, you're there till it's done. And so, we would be in the motor pool till 12 o'clock at night sometimes, fixing a vehicle. And, I really appreciated my soldiers doing the things they were supposed to do and being there to do it. But I would take care of them. I'd say, okay, you were here till midnight tonight. You don't need to come to PT in the morning. Come in at 8 o'clock. I'd give them a little bit of a break. So you still take care of them, but you still got to get the job done. And they
Correct.
understood that.
Yeah. What advice would you have for somebody that is, say, building their business and then developing this team? What are some, strategies that we can use so we can get this boat rowing in the right direction,
Right.
without people becoming too individualistic?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple things. I think number one, and you alluded to it earlier, your own professional development, your own personal development. And that is huge. You have to do that. I don't care if you've been a leader for 50 years. If you think you can't learn anything else, go do something else, because you're not any good anymore. We can all learn something. And so take every opportunity to make yourself a better leader, because the people you're leading deserve that. They deserve that you're the best leader you can be. Number two, don't forget that the people who are working for you have aspirations to be leaders as well. Some of them don't, but that's okay. Have a professional development program for them as well, so that you're developing them, so that it just like you were saying earlier, generally in a lot of civilian businesses, people become leaders because they were the best salesman or the best mechanic or the best whatever. And we put them in a leadership position with no training to be a leader. We're setting them up for failure.
That happens all the time, right?
It happens all the time. So develop a leadership development program for anybody and everybody in your organization. And here's one of the reasons why. If I'm working for you and I have an aspiration to be a leader and you aren't showing me a path to get there, then I'm going to somebody who does.
Yeah.
So you're losing your best talent to somebody else because you didn't set up a path for them to become a leader in your organization. So I think that's part of it. I think the other piece of it is the camaraderie that you have to develop. And we talked about a couple of ways to do that. I think another couple of ways is to bring people together on a regular basis, whether it's once a month or once a quarter or whatever it is that you can do. Recognize achievements publicly with everybody there.
Yeah.
If you get somebody new on the staff, have a hail. And we in the Army, we call it a hail and farewell. We say hello to the new people and we say goodbye to the people that are leaving publicly in an event. So I think the more you can get people together so they get to know each other and trust each other, the better chance you have of getting everybody moving in the same direction. Look, you're never going to get everybody. I got it. There's some people who are there just to draw a paycheck and they just want their money and go home. And that's okay. As long as they do what they're supposed to do and they're doing it well, I don't care if that's really all you want. I would prefer that it's not what you want, but that's your choice. Most people in your organization aren't that way, and they want to be there and they want to grow as a community, not just as an employee that doing a job.
Yeah, those are all really good points. And I think, you were touching on it, and something a lot of us have adapted to is you have to be intentional about those things. You literally have to set it aside, put it on the calendar.
Absolutely.
And that's something that I have done to force time as a group, just socially even. Yeah.
And just having a lunch and, go on this day, once a quarter, we're going to go out and have lunch as a group. Something that brings them together. And lots of times in a non-work, not in the office, outside the office, those are even better because now they can kind of relax a little bit.
Yeah. It's so meaningful. And I can see what that's done for our team. They love it. When I sit down with them and say, what are some of the things we're doing well, they all acknowledge those things.
Yeah.
We'll take some time out about every other week to play a game. We'll play a Jeopardy and like a Pictionary game. And then we get our remote workers involved. They love it. And it's just a time to laugh and to come together. So things aren't so, serious, because our business can be very challenging. We touched on something that you reminded me of. I loved this quote on your website, which is, today's leaders have a responsibility to inspire the leaders of tomorrow. And I'll acknowledge that's something I feel like I've struggled in, because I think we all figure out that we want leaders, in our business. We don't want followers. We want problem solvers. What are some ways that we can, as business owners, that we can develop leaders? And how is that done in the military ranks?
Yeah. So I number one, you train people to the standard that you want them to do things.
Yeah.
Because then once you've trained them and you know that they can do what you're asking them to do, you don't have to be a micromanager. And there's nothing worse than being a micromanager.
Right.
Nobody likes to be micromanaged. We've all been micromanaged and we all hated it. Okay. So the way to get around from that and to help develop them so they can make their own decisions. Number one, train them to a standard. Number two, when you task somebody, and I hate the word task, when you delegate something to somebody, then you give them all the resources that they need, time, money, people, equipment, whatever it is that they need to do to get that job done. Then you give them the authority. And here's the key. You got to give them the authority to make it happen. You as the leader, you're always responsible for everything in your organization that does or doesn't happen. That's your job. Your name's always on the blame line. Sorry, you can't delegate that. You're responsible. And I think that's part of the problem in this world today is people not taking responsibility.
Yep.
That should, because you don't get to pick and choose as the leader what you're responsible for. You're responsible for everything. But you can give away authority, delegate the authority to get this job done, and then get out of their way.
Yeah.
That's the hard part.
Right.
Let them do it. Will they do it exactly the same way you would have done it? Absolutely not. But who cares? If you've given them a clear task, they know exactly what the end product needs to look like, then let them do it the way they would do it. And the analogy that I always use is 7 + 2 is 9, but so is 6 + 3 and 5 + 4 and 8 + 1. Who cares how you get to 9 as long as you get to 9?
Right.
Let them figure out how they want to get to 9.
Yeah. 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 Great advice. Lieutenant McCullough, I appreciate the time today. A lot of great information. So I just want to thank you so much, and thank you for your service, by the way.
Yeah, well, thank you. I always tell people like it was an honor and a privilege to serve the people of this nation. So I always appreciate it when somebody thanks me, but I did it because it was an honor and a privilege. Yeah, absolutely. And I loved being on the show today, Brad. This was great.
Great. Everyone else, thank you for listening to another episode of the Agents to Owners podcast. We'll see you next week.